Welcome to Pedophile Island, the most notorious place in Michigan. This place is extremely hard to get to. We had people with charter planes cancel on us, and we had to hire someone to boat us out there. But this place holds dark secrets. The full video of us exploring this island is on my YouTube now.
Basically, this was a real-life killer clown, bro. So Marlene Warren was the victim, right?
Okay.
So she had 2 kids. She was married before. Her husband ended up dying. Then she ended up marrying this guy named Michael Warren. Some time flies by and stuff. They kind of started getting a little distant from each other. A lot of arguments and the thing that kind of like really separated them was the death of one of her kids. And it was a little weird because she would tell her mom, if something happens to me, I'm pretty sure it would be him. And then one day she's at home with her son, right? Out of nowhere, they hear a knock at the door and they see a white car outside. It's a white Chrysler. She answers the door. There's a clown standing outside.
Gosh, okay.
With balloons in the hands and flowers, right? The clown, all they do is hand her the balloons.
And they stand there?
Hand her the and flowers. Out of nowhere, they pull out a gun, a small revolver, and shoot her in the face, bro. They walk to the car and they run. And then the son, he described the clown as a orange hair, red and white paint on their face, and like a full clown suit. Keep in mind the dad wasn't home.
So this already sounds kind of sus.
So they're investigating where the fuck he was, because yo, they had no evidence that the dad did it, bro. He literally had people and witnesses saying that he was at this spot doing this and that. But then they find a store literally a little bit away from the house. They say that a girl with gloves came in to buy flowers and the balloons. They also went to a costume shop where recently an orange wig and a clown costume was purchased, as well as red paint and white face paint, bro. 12 years later after that, they find out that he was having an affair.
Somebody else?
Her name was Sheila Keene. They get married, bro.
Who, the
Sheila Keene
and the husband?
So now the cops are like, what the fuck is happening, bro? I thought y'all said y'all didn't know.
One night, a teenage girl was arguing with her parents because they refused to let her go to a party, but she was determined. Later that night, she quietly slipped out of the house and went anyway. At the party, she met a guy and instantly clicked with him. They laughed, danced, and had a great time together. Then he asked her if she wanted to go to another party nearby. Excited, she agreed. As they walked to his car, she noticed he was clearly drunk. A knot of hesitation formed in her stomach. But she liked him, so she pushed her doubts aside and got in the car. Once on the highway, the reckless driving became terrifying. She begged him to slow down, but he ignored her, laughing as he swerved across lanes and went head-on with another car. Then, in an instant, everything went black. She woke up in a hospital bed, dazed and in pain. A nurse was standing beside her. The driver, what happened? And the people in the car, she asked. The nurse's expression darkened. I'm sorry, she said softly. Everyone died on impact except you. Tears rolled down the girl's face. Guilt hit her like a wave. Please, she whispered. Tell my parents I love them. Tell them I'm sorry I disobeyed them. The nurse hesitated. She then spoke the words that destroyed the girl's world. I'm so sorry, but the people in the other car were your parents.
Nothing drives me more crazy than when someone dies under mysterious circumstances and there's so much evidence left behind, yet no one knows what actually happened. Or when someone is killed and there's evidence that it could be a major cover-up, yet nothing is certain because of who is involved. This is what's currently happening to Karen Reed, and this is genuinely the first case that I don't know what to believe. If you don't know who this woman is, you should watch the upcoming new true crime docuseries from Investigation Discovery called A Body in the Snow, The Trial of Karen Reed. In just 5 episodes, this special will cover in depth the recent murder trial of Karen Reed, who was accused of murdering her boyfriend, John O'Keefe. This is an extremely high-profile murder case because John was a Boston police officer of 16 years, and yet what exactly happened to him and who was responsible has never been explained. So on January 28th, 2022, Karen and John, who'd been dating for 2 years, went out to a bar. Their relationship had its ups and downs, but on that specific night, everything seemed fine. According to Karen, when they left the bar, she dropped John off at a house where there was going to be an after party. This said house just so happened to belong to a fellow police officer, more specifically a now retired Boston police sergeant. What followed is still a mystery, but it resulted in John being mortally injured and left for dead in the snow on the front lawn of this sergeant's house. His body wouldn't be found until the next morning, and almost immediately all fingers were pointed at Karen. Evidence was found that really incriminated her, and so she was arrested and charged with his murder. But here's the thing. Said evidence reportedly could have been planted by police in an attempt to frame Karen. At least that's what she's saying happened. happened. And conveniently enough, not a single witness actually saw Karen do anything. So this case went to trial in 2024, which resulted in a mistrial. This docuseries walks you through the evidence found, and it lets you hear every possible angle from those involved in the case, including Karen herself. In fact, for the majority of the series, you will hear from Karen directly. And one thing that I found interesting was how at one moment she was talking about her old life, and the very next she was somehow being accused of murdering a Boston police officer. But one thing that I appreciated in this series was how closely it followed Karen, because it really gave you the chance to examine her words and her body language. In the show, the trial was described as a murder carnival, and that's exactly what it was. I can guarantee you that just by watching this, you will never hear of a more twisted case, and the facts they present are going to make your jaw drop. Could Karen really be responsible for such a heinous crime? Or is there something much more sinister at play, possibly involving those with power who we are supposed to trust? Watch A Body in the Snow, The Trial of Karen Reed to find out for yourself. This docuseries is premiering on Investigation Discovery over 3 nights, March 17th and 18th, and the finale on March 19th at 9 p.m. I need you guys to watch this.
There's an active serial killer in Austin, Texas. I have spent the last few weeks researching all of this. I've spoken with the families of victims, and the conclusions that we've drawn here are absolutely disturbing. But let's take a look. So in the last decade or so, there have been over 20 men's bodies that were found in Lady Bird Lake in Austin, Texas. Here's a map of just the bodies that were found in 2022 to 2023. So if you've never been to Austin and you don't know what Lady Bird Lake is, it's not really a lake, it's more like a river. It flows right through the center of the city. And when people come to Austin, they paddleboard on Lady Bird Lake. I actually used to live in these apartments right here, so my wife and I walked there all the time. But in the last couple of years, so many men's bodies have been found in that body of water that people are saying there's a serial killer. I've got documents, autopsy reports. We're gonna back all this stuff up with evidence. So swimming has actually been banned in Lady Bird Lake since the 1960s. And that swimming ban came after tragically 2 sisters drowned in the lake along with a couple of other people that same year. And so the Austin City Council unanimously voted to stop people from swimming there. Now, I know that people drown and accidentally die all the time, but it's the very suspicious circumstances surrounding these men's deaths that has led me to draw a different conclusion. If you want me to go line item through every person that's died there, let me know and I'll make this a series. I have done a lot of research on this subject. So the first death that was really suspicious in Lady Bird Lake was in 2008, and it was this man who died, Riyad Hammad. Now, Riyad was a very well-educated man. He was a teacher in the Austin area. He had loads of friends and family, and he frequently gave money to and volunteered with Palestinian relief charities. But a few months before his death, the FBI raided Riyad's home. It was reported that they took out 40 boxes of materials from his house, and it's never been revealed exactly what they removed from his home or exactly why they were looking there in the first place. Because only a few months later, Riyad's body was found in Lady Bird Lake. Now this is really bizarre stuff. So the authorities said that Riyad had taken his own life. But when they pulled Riyad's body out of Lady Bird Lake, there were some bizarre things on it. His hands and feet were duct taped together. There was duct tape covering his mouth, duct tape really all over his face. And immediately people thought there is no way that he could have done this to himself. But before any sort of real investigation was done into this is a real APD news bulletin from April 16th, 2008. The Austin Police Department and authorities in the city declared that this was a case of somebody taking their own life. That's all that it was, according to Austin police. But as you can see from local newspaper reports at the time, people were immediately questioning exactly what happened to Riyad. But there would never be any real answers in this case. But this was only the start. Like I said, there have been over 20 men's bodies found here, and some of the circumstances are even more bizarre than what we just talked about. And I'm going to make some more videos exposing this stuff so people can be aware of what's happening in Austin. But if you want right now, you can head to my YouTube channel, The Paranormal Files Official Channel. And I just released a 3-hour-long documentary going over every single fact in this case. Like I said, I talked to family members of victims who believe that their loved ones were killed. And this is some really eye-opening stuff. So the link is going to be in my bio. And I'm going to continue this series over the next couple of days to hopefully raise some awareness of what's happening in a city that I have so much love for.
Abby and Zoe were best friends enjoying a quiet evening together. Abby's laughter echoed through the room as she sipped her wine. Zoe's 2-year-old son played on the floor, his tiny hands rummaging through his mother's purse. As Zoe stepped away to use the bathroom, Abby turned her attention to the boy. "What are you playing with, little man?" she asked, smiling. The toddler giggled innocently, his hands fumbling through lipstick and keys until they landed on something cold and metallic. It was a gun. The tiny boy, oblivious to the danger, began waving the handgun around, pointing it at Abby. Her heart sank and panic filled her voice. "Put that down, sweetie. That's not a toy," she pleaded. Her voice trembling, but he didn't understand. And then, the single shot echoed through the house. Abby's lifeless body slumped to the floor, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Blood covered the entire floor. Hearing the shot, Zoe sprinted back into the room. The sight before her was a nightmare, her best friend motionless in a growing pool of blood. Her son still playing with the gun as though nothing had happened. With shaking hands, Zoe snatched the gun from her son, tears streaming down her face. She called 911, choking on her words as she explained the unthinkable tragedy. The authorities arrived, but nothing could undo what had just been done. One innocent moment of a child's curiosity had turned into an unimaginable tragedy.
I don't know if you ever heard about this man. His name is Robert Hansen, or aka the Butcher Baker. But this man loved to hunt his victims like they were wild animals. Growing up, he was a shy kid. He was really quiet. He didn't get the attention he wanted from the pretty girls in his school. So he grew hatred toward them. He kind of had fantasies of revenge toward them. He also grew love for archery and hunting throughout this time. So it's kind of like foreshadowing what was to come in the future. And then fast forward to the 70s, he's operating a successful bakery. He's well known in the community, bro. But during this time was also where he would start his murders. He would drive around looking for vulnerable women. Majority of the time they would be prostitutes and sex workers. He would approach them and tell them that he's a photographer and he's looking for models to take pictures for, and he'll pay them. So it's like a paid gig. He would tell them, "I bet. So just meet me at this place the next day." He would get there before they get there, and he would hide in his car. Once he saw that they were alone, he would approach them. He'll tell them to come in his car. Once they get in the car, he would reach over and pretend like he's gonna put on their seatbelt for them. And so he would grab the girl's wrist, handcuff them to open handcuffs, and then point a gun to their head and be like, "Be quiet." During his confession, he was bragging about it. He was like, "I did this so much that it became like muscle memory to him." And then after that, he would bring them to his house. That's where he would sexually assault them for hours and hours. After that, take them back to his car. He would drive to the airport, put them on a plane, and then take them to a cabin that he owned in like a remote area, bro. He would blindfold them, undress them, and they're still handcuffed at this point. And then he would walk them out his front door, and then he'd be like, "Aye, go, you're free, run." He would grab his knife, 223 caliber rifle, and then he'll just begin stalking his prey, as he explained it. And this could last like hours to days, bro. He would sometimes
completely vanished, but his TV was still on in his room and someone had deleted everything off his computer. This chilling case was featured on Netflix's Unsolved Mysteries, and the details are haunting. It was November 2002 in Minnesota. Josh Guimond was a 20-year-old student at St. John's University. Now, he was an A-star student and had an extremely bright future ahead of him. He intended to go to law school and certainly had the grades to match his ambitions. That's really creepy. My bedroom light has just turned itself off. So Josh was living with 5 roommates on campus, including his best mate Nick. Now, on the 9th of November, he was invited to a poker party in the Metten Court dormitory building, which actually wasn't far away from Josh's dorm. It was literally a maximum of 3 minutes walk away. Josh was pretty keen to go to this party because he actually had just gone through a breakup and wanted to kind of take his mind off it. This was a breakup with his long-term girlfriend Katie, and although they had agreed to be friends still, it was still pretty difficult for Josh and he just wanted to have a distraction. So Josh headed over to the party and did seem in good spirits. Some of the people at the party said he seemed pretty drunk or kind of tipsy, and some people said he seemed sober. What wasn't disputed though was that he left at 11:45 p.m. alone. Pretty much everyone at the party assumed he'd just gone home to bed. They had no reason to believe there was anything else more sinister at play. Josh had a meeting the next day, so maybe that's why he chose to go home to bed and get an early night, but he never showed up to the meeting. That's when alarm bells began to ring. His friends alerted the campus security, who soon went over to his dorm to investigate. And they found no sign of Josh, but eerily his TV was still on in his bedroom. His car was still parked outside as normal, and all of his personal belongings were in there untouched. After being unable to get hold of Josh, the campus security notified his parents of his disappearance, and they hadn't heard from him either. Locals banded together to hunt for Josh, and the water beneath a nearby bridge was even searched, just on the off chance that he'd kind of fallen in a drunken state and accidentally drowned. They had no luck though, and pretty soon students were being questioned. Interestingly, Josh's best mate Nick had apparently kissed his ex-girlfriend Katie, and this had caused a bit of a stir between Josh and Nick. The night before, witnesses had even heard the two males arguing, and it's believed that this is what it was over. Now, Kate and Nick were even together the night Josh disappeared. Nick then returned to his dorm at 2:42 a.m. according to the electronic key that you need to use to go into the dorm. Josh's keycard was never used, though, to re-enter the building. Nick and Katie's stories kind of interestingly differ slightly. Nick said that the pair said their goodbyes at around 2:30 a.m, but Kate said that it was around an hour before that. This could potentially be due to alcohol, students just out having a good time. Maybe they didn't exactly keep tabs on exactly the time, but it's strange that they differ by an hour. Nick also refused to take a lie detector test. So investigators scoured Josh's bedroom and interestingly found that someone had deleted items off his computer just after he went missing. Now this could have been many different people. It could have been a roommate or anyone that was let into the flat using any of the key cards. Josh could possibly have returned and been let in with somebody else's keycard that night. What officers found really strange was it seemed that Josh had made multiple online accounts, different sort of profiles, and had been chatting with both men and women via chat rooms. Had he gone out that night to meet somebody potentially offline? One person in the case was identified as a person of interest. This was a mystery man who'd been seen loitering around campus in his car. Now police spoke with him and he denied knowing anything about Josh, but suspiciously he had his car destroyed before police could seize it. Police dogs were also used to try and track Josh's scent and see maybe if they could trace where he ended up, and the dogs led investigators to St. John's Abbey, the Benedictine monastery on campus. Chillingly though, they wouldn't let them in until they pretty much had no choice. Investigators also found that Josh was looking into abuse allegations made regarding monks and priests at St. John's University. Multiple people backed up these allegations, and in 2016, files were publicized of 18 monks that were accused of SAing children. Was Josh just about to expose somebody? Now, one of those monks was interestingly in charge of supervising Josh's dormitory. Despite Netflix covering the case on Unsolved Mysteries, Josh has never been located, and neither has the person who's potentially to blame for this. She called her mum in a panic, saying she'd seen a terrifying handprint on her bathroom mirror. She said it looked like somebody had put their hand on the mirror and dragged it down like out of a horror film. A month later, she vanished. This is the horrifying case of the murder of Stephanie Pars. Stephanie Pars was 25 years old. She lived in Freehold Township in New Jersey all of her life and was a huge Yankees fan. She was tiny at 4'11", but her dad described her as an absolute firecracker. She really was full of life. She adored children and looking after children, and she turned this passion into her career and worked as a nanny. She was really good at this. It was definitely one of her callings in life. She was also extremely talented, as you can see, as a makeup artist and specialised in special effects makeup. Now, so much so that she actually gained a big following online, posting these crazy makeup looks. It wasn't only makeup that she was posting about online. She also wanted to find a boyfriend and was active on online dating sites. That was until she met a man called John Osbilgen. He was 29, so he was a little bit older than her, but she kind of liked that. He was a stockbroker from New Jersey who worked on Staten Island, and she felt like he was a catch. The relationship moved pretty quickly, and Stephanie really did think she'd met a good guy, but her dad kind of felt differently. He had this gut feeling that John just wasn't right for her, but she insisted that he gave him a chance. And the dad's gut instinct was right. I mean, usually parents kind of know best in these cases. And John had actually previously been arrested on substance charges and for assaulting a female. The relationship between John and Stephanie quickly became toxic. She really wasn't happy, so much so that she'd even tried to end it with John, but he actually became violent. She got the police involved and she told them she was scared that he would become violent again, but he was very manipulative and he kept worming his way back into her life. Then some really weird things started happening that really freaked Stephanie out. In early October, Stephanie called her mum in a panic, saying that she felt the house she was in was haunted or possessed. She had found a spindly handprint on the bathroom mirror that, quote, looked like somebody put their hand on it and dragged their fingers down. And this wasn't the only chilling discovery. A few days later, unfortunately, she found her beloved pet parakeet dead at the bottom of its cage, and it was apparently cold as stone. Were these two things just eerie coincidences? On the 30th of October 2019, Stephanie and her family went to a psychic show. They had a great time, and when they parted ways that evening, Stephanie's mum kissed her and said, "Let me know when you get home safe." She never heard from her daughter again. Alarm bells really started to ring the following day when Stephanie failed to show up for her nanny job. Now, she was usually very reliable, so her family just knew something was up. Strangely, her car and her phone were discovered at her house. But there was no sign of Stephanie, and strangely her dog was there just on its own. There was no sign of forced entry or really any clues as to what could have happened to Stephanie. A huge group of volunteers actually searched miles and miles of land to look for any kind of clues or signs of the missing woman. They were nicknamed by Stephanie's family Steph's Angels. Now, John was an obvious suspect from the get-go, and police interviewed him, but he seemed just as confused as everyone else. He said he'd stayed the night with Stephanie that night, and the last he saw, she was getting ready for work. John's phone was seized by officers, and what authorities found next was incredibly disturbing. Though it didn't really help them to figure out where Stephanie was, they found illegal images of minors on his phone, so he was obviously arrested immediately. They did notice that he had some marks on his neck at this point. Now, was this a clue as to Stephanie's fate? They ended up using more information from his phone, specifically GPS data, to try and track down any places of interest. This led them to Long Pond Park, and the phone actually indicated he'd been there for around 6 hours after Stephanie was reported missing by her mum. What on earth was he doing in that park for so long? Yet more data was uncovered from the phone, including nasty messages from John to Stephanie the night before she disappeared. And he was pretty much blaming her for the failure of the relationship, and Stephanie was just ignoring him. Frustratingly, police had no luck finding Stephanie and had no real solid evidence that John was responsible, so they had to let him go. Then, just 3 days later, there was some news. John had unalived himself in the garage of his parents' home and left 2 notes. The first note to his family read, "Dear Mum, Dad, Sal and Sammy, sorry about all this craziness. I've been miserable for so long now. I had enough. Thanks for everything. I can't do life in prison. Most of the stuff you will hear is true, except the child blank. I would never do that. Use the pics of me and blank for the funeral. That was the only time in my life I was truly happy. I want blank to help plan everything with you. Tell her I'm sorry and I love her. She was so good to me. We had an amazing life. I blank it up. She only did good for me. I dug myself a deep hole. This is the only choice. I love you guys." Now, the second note was to his ex-girlfriend, basically stating a lot of waffle. She was the best thing that ever happened to him, and asking her why she got a restraining order against him. He said he wished he could go back in time, and horrifically starts berating Stephanie in the letter, that the girl in the news was a piece of S that hurt him over and over. Now, interestingly, in the letter, obviously he stated, "Most of the stuff you will hear is true, and I dug myself a deep hole." Police took this as a confession of guilt in Stephanie's case. His parents weirdly didn't, though, and they chose to believe that he was not guilty. They said that there was nothing in this letter up here that indicated that he actually killed Stephanie. So let me know your thoughts on that. On the 26th of January 2020, 2 members of the public stumbled upon what they thought was a mannequin by the side of the road. It turned out to be Stephanie, lying face down, deceased. Her cause of death was never released. Her family were understandably absolutely heartbroken, and the person responsible just never got brought to justice.
One thing that will always disturb me to my core is when someone vanishes into thin air, only to be found dead months later, so close to where they went missing. That entire time, they were right there, yet they were mysteriously never found. That's what happened to 19-year-old Tanner Ward in 2017. He left his parents' house telling them that he'd be back in just 30 minutes. He never came home, but 6 months later, his decomposed and partially mummified body was found hanging from a tree just 3 blocks from his parents' home. His feet were missing, and still are to this day, and he was found in an area that had already been previously searched multiple times. Yet police say no foul play is involved. A lot of people question what really happened to Tanner that night, so let's talk about it. On June 7th, 2017, Tanner left his parents' home in Trenton, Missouri. He kissed his girlfriend and newborn baby girl goodbye and told his family that he was going to meet up with a friend named Jeremiah, but that he would be back in 30 minutes. He asked his mom to make him a plate for dinner and took off walking away from the home. This was the last time that Tanner was ever seen alive, and what happened after this has never really been explained. When Tanner failed to return home that night, his family reported him missing to the police, and one of the first things they did was piece together a timeline of his last movements. Tanner and his sister were very close, and she knew all of his friends. But one thing that stood out to her was that she didn't know who Jeremiah was. Trenton is a pretty small town, and it's common for everyone to kind of know each other. So it was strange that she had no idea who this person was. No one in his family, even Tanner's girlfriend, knew who Jeremiah was. So his sister took to social media to find out. She ended up finding who he was and initially went to his house to look for Tanner, but she found nothing. Police issued a search for Tanner, really focusing on the areas surrounding his home, but they also found nothing. It was like he just vanished into thin air. Fast forward a couple of days, and this is when Tanner's sister was going around town and hanging up missing person posters. While she was doing this, she said that Jeremiah walked up to her wearing one of Tanner's shirts, except now it was stained in what looked like maybe a dark liquid or a burn of some sort. At the time, she thought that this was the shirt that Tanner went missing in. It turned out that it wasn't, but this concerned her enough to tell the police about Jeremiah, and when they were notified, they went to search his house and found something incredibly suspicious. Immediately after arriving, the cadaver dogs that the police had brought picked up on a hit on top of a fresh burn pile in the backyard. The dogs hit on this area twice actually, so this led authorities to dig up the area, but the only thing they found were animal bones, none that were human, and again, no trace of Tanner. Authorities were able to locate the shirt that reportedly belonged to Tanner that his sister saw, and it was analyzed, but police never confirmed if the dark liquid was blood, or if it had been burned somehow. Despite the dogs hitting on this area and Jeremiah being the last person Tanner was known to be around, this was the last time he was ever questioned, and it was the last time that his house was ever searched. Over time, there would be multiple searches for Tanner, but there would be no movement in this case until 6 months later. On December 4th, 2017, 2 kids were walking to school in a wooded area just 3 blocks from Tanner's home when they made a gruesome discovery. As they were walking, they heard a very distinguishable sound, and they noticed something swinging from a tree above them, and when they looked up, they found a severely decomposed body hanging from a tree. So the kids called the police, and when they arrived, they saw the same thing. A severely decomposed body hanging from a 25-foot tree near an abandoned grain elevator. Parts of this person's body were mummified and the feet were completely missing. The body was so decomposed that it took a full day to identify it, but after testing, it was confirmed that the remains belonged to Tanner. Authorities found his shirt, pants, and shoes underneath him. It only took authorities 1 day to state that Tanner's official manner of death was suicide because the only injury on his body that they could find was to his neck. They say that he ended his own life, but this is where things start to get strange. So Tanner's family and people in the community don't believe that he ended his own life, and there are a few reasons why. Police say that his body had been there hanging from that tree the entire time, yet certain evidence suggests otherwise. The high school kids who found Tanner's body had taken that exact path to school almost daily, and they never once saw his body there. And it wasn't just them either. It was a wooded area, but other students also took that same path to school multiple times, and no one saw a dead body hanging there. Furthermore, a woman also said that she walked her son to school, again on that same path, and she's adamant that absolutely nothing was there. This was 11 days before Tanner's body was discovered, and the area is also a well-known spot where people go to walk their dogs. It's just odd to me that not one single person, either on a day-to-day basis or during the multiple searches for Tanner, saw his body hanging there in the 6 months that he was missing. Like I said, the area had already been searched, and it was only 3 blocks away from his parents' home. So it's just odd to me that he wasn't found sooner. Some suggest that the reason he wasn't found sooner is because people don't tend to look up into the trees very often, which I guess is is true, but that brings me to another point. It gets really hot and humid in Trenton during the summer months. It's crazy to me that no one smelled a decaying body during that entire time, especially because there were construction crews in the area only about 30 feet away. Police say the wind blew the stench away, which leads me to yet another point. It's also known to get pretty windy in the area, and there were multiple rainstorms during the time that Tanner was missing and supposedly hanging from the tree. In fact, the kids walking by noticed his body because it was swinging in the wind. I find it hard to believe that nobody saw his body before then, as there were more than likely a handful of extremely windy days where people were walking in the area. This brings me to the mystery surrounding the state of his body. So both of Tanner's feet were missing, and authorities say this is likely due to either the process of decomposition or by wild animals scavenging his remains. Some question whether or not an animal would only take his feet and not the rest of his body. He was found hanging from a tall tree, so I suppose if it was an animal, it would make sense to go for his feet since they are hanging lowest to the ground. Then there's the question of if it's strictly due to being decomposed. Why was it just his feet and no other part of his body? I'm sure there's a logical explanation on why that would happen, medically speaking, but even so, why weren't they found? There's a lot of talk about how the police handled Tanner's case, or really mishandled it. For example, when his remains were found, authorities didn't tape off the area, and multiple people came and went, which compromised the scene. No samples were taken of the soil surrounding Tanner's remains, and there were a lot of tips that weren't ever followed up on. One tip was that a few people in the community were overheard talking about how Tanner was dead and how his body would never be found, well before he was discovered. And there are reportedly videotapes surrounding the situation that could lead to more information that police never looked at. Tanner was known to have struggled a little bit in the past, and not long before he went missing, he pleaded guilty to unlawful use of a weapon stemming from an incident at an apartment building in Trenton. He was placed on 5 years of probation, but after he went missing, police issued a warrant for his arrest, citing that he violated his probation somehow. So while he was actively missing, the police issued a warrant for his arrest, and people think that the reason he wasn't found sooner was because the police just simply didn't care. After Tanner went missing, his friends came forward and said that he occasionally would do drugs, and his mom did know about this, but according to her, he seemed to be doing better and going down the right path. Some believe that when he went to go meet Jeremiah, it was for a drug deal that somehow went wrong, and that would explain why no one in his family knew who Jeremiah was, because he wasn't actually a friend, just someone he possibly bought drugs from. After Tanner's body was found, his family received an anonymous tip that said he had been held somewhere, tortured, stashed in a freezer, and then his body was staged to make it look like a suicide. This is obviously horrific to hear, but I think whoever sent this tip in was just someone who was deranged and twisted, because there were no signs of torture on Tanner's body. 2 separate autopsies were done by 2 different agencies, and they both concluded that Tanner died by suicide. They noted that the way his neck was injured, which was ultimately what killed him, really only happens in hangings, specifically when someone hangs themselves, and it can't really be replicated by another person. They also noted that the indentation on the tree branch suggested that Tanner had been hanging there for a long time, which adds up to him being there for 6 months. But it's still odd to me that no one found him sooner. Trenton police say that there's no evidence that foul play is involved, but Tanner's family disagrees. They say that he would never end his own life like that, and they believe that he was murdered. Tanner was described as a happy person who absolutely loved his girlfriend and new little baby girl. He was just about to propose to his girlfriend too, and he was just making a lot of plans for his future. They believe that there is more to this story, and they just want answers. It's stories like this that really scare me and stick with me for a long time. Like, I just don't get how someone can go missing but be right there the entire time. And even when they're found, there's still so many questions that linger. But it's now been 8 years, and whatever happened to Tanner that summer night remains a mystery.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
So apparently there is a Netflix curse. I've covered so much spooky stuff on this page and I've seen nothing like this ever. So Netflix recently released a new docuseries called Breakpoint, and it showcases 10 of the hottest up-and-comers in tennis right now. But right now is also the Australian Open. And 0 of the 10 tennis players featured in the docuseries made it to even the second week of the Open. These are 10 of the best tennis players in the entire world, and 2 of them lost to players seeded at 87 and 113. And 3 of them didn't even make it to the Open because of leg injuries. And people are accusing Netflix so bad of cursing these players that Netflix even came out and said that it was just a coincidence. But if it's a coincidence that happened to every single player featured, that's pretty insane.
These are scary games to play in real life, part 3. This game is called Cat Scratch, and you need at least 2 people to play. To start the game, one of you needs to sit down on the floor and the other one lies on the floor, on their back with their head in your lap. And if anybody else is playing, just have them sit around you guys in a circle. Next, rub the person's temple who is lying down in a soothing motion as you tell them a scary story about a cat. This is how it goes. You are walking down a dark alley late at night. You are the only one there. The ground is slick with rain. The alley is filled with garbage cans and litter. But then you hear something, a movement in the garbage cans. You pick up your pace. You want to get out of the alley fast, but then you see something. Red eyes, glowing red cat eyes. They are the eyes of an enormous cat. You run, but the cat chases you and jumps on you. It scratches you 1, 2, 3. Cat scratch, cat scratch, cat scratch. After you finish the story, the person gets up quickly and pulls up the back of their shirt. And you would then notice you have red claw marks on your back. And the crazy thing is, you won't feel anything.
I deliberately crashed the plane I was flying after a breakup, killing all 149 people on board. My name is Andreas Lubitz, and I was 27 years old at the time of the incident. I had been a co-pilot for 1 year, and I was suffering from depression. I had already been treated in the past, but I had decided to stop taking my medication. It was on Tuesday, March 25th, that I decided to act. Around 9:30 p.m., the captain left the cockpit to go to the toilet. I then pressed the lock button, which locked the doors, making it impossible to enter from the outside. No one else could get in. A few seconds later, the captain came out of the bathroom and started banging on the door for me to open it. I didn't answer him, and I had already started to dive the plane. A few seconds later, the plane exploded against the mountains in the Alps in France, killing all passengers on board without exception. A few months earlier, I had told my ex-girlfriend that people would remember me, but she had no idea that I would be capable of doing something so terrible. Since this horrific event, aviation has changed its rules, and it is now forbidden to be alone in the cockpit.
I committed 2 murders at the age of 16 during my fugitive days, and that propelled me to become a globally recognized rapper. I am the rapper Tay-K, born as Taymor Trayvon McIntyre. And here's my story. Involved in dark affairs, I was placed under house arrest at the age of 16, but on March 26, 2017, I decided to cut my bracelet and escape, marking the beginning of my fugitive journey. Passionate about rap since childhood, I took advantage of my time on the run to record tracks and later create a music video. But lacking a camera, on April 23, 2017, I robbed and killed Mark Saldivar, a young photographer, to steal his camera. A few weeks later, I robbed and assaulted a 65-year-old man, taking his wallet and leaving him for dead. Then comes June 30th, 2017, where I released the track The Race and got arrested the same evening. The media seized the story, and the track went viral, eventually becoming platinum. I even received tremendous support from fans through the Free Tay-K movement when I was incarcerated. The music video for The Race now has over 240 million views on YouTube, and I currently have over 4 million monthly listeners on Spotify. But this success, I contemplate from my cell because I was sentenced to 55 years during my trial in July 2019.
We were the perfect couple on TikTok, but my husband ended up shooting me in the head. My name is Ana Abulaban. I was 28 years old in 2021 when my husband killed me with a gunshot to the head, leaving our young daughter without a mother and with a father in prison. My husband, Ali Abulaban, was already a violent man before my death. He constantly stalked me and was excessively jealous without reason. He always thought I was cheating on him, despite being a loyal woman and mother. No one knew the truth behind the image of the perfect couple that we pretended to be for everyone, both in real life and on social media. Our relationship began to deteriorate, especially in 2021, when I could no longer bear to be with him because I feared for my life and that of my daughter. On October 18th, 2021, I asked Ali to leave our home. I was afraid of his reaction, so I obtained a restraining order against him. 3 days later, he entered my home and installed an app on our daughter's iPad to listen and watch what was happening inside my house. On the same day, Ali heard the voice of one of our close friends in my house and simply couldn't bear it. He entered my home again, but this time I was present, and so was my friend. He killed my friend Rayburn Barron with 3 shots to the head. Right after that, it was my turn. He killed me the same way. Today, he faces charges for a double murder. Beware of what people show on social media.
So whatever happened to Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment at the Oxford Apartments? If you don't remember, this is where Jeffrey Dahmer was eventually caught, and this is where they found all of the gruesome discoveries associated with Jeffrey Dahmer. It's absolutely eerie to look at photos of his apartment and consider what they found in there. But what happened to the building, the Oxford Apartments building? Well, obviously after investigators discovered what they did in Jeffrey's apartment, the place was stained forever. And so shortly after all this happened, the apartments, the entire complex, they were demolished. And nowadays, all that's left is this patch of grass where the apartments once stood. It's gotta be eerie living in one of these units and knowing exactly what happened right here. I actually went and filmed a whole Jeffrey Dahmer documentary where we visited the old Oxford Apartments area and investigated for paranormal activity. Let me tell you, that place is loaded with energy. At one point, using our devices, we captured what looked like bodies laying on the ground, like 3 or 4 of them. And I think at one point, using one of our devices, we literally heard the voice of Jeffrey Dahmer coming through. I'm not kidding, I know that sounds really extreme, but you have to listen to the video and just see what I'm talking about. Anyways, it's called The Ghost of Jeffrey Dahmer if you want to look it up and learn more about the Jeffrey Dahmer story. And my wife and I actually did a whole Dahmer series on our podcast, Murder in America, if you want to listen to what I'm talking about.
A woman obsessed with true crime murdered a stranger out of curiosity. Jung Ju Jung is a 23-year-old woman from South Korea. In June 2023, she was arrested after something horrific came to light. Jung had posed as a mother on a tutoring app to lure a victim to her. She pretended to be a mother who was looking for an English tutor for her daughter. She contacted a total of 54 people before eventually picking a victim. The woman in question has not been publicly identified but is known to have been 26. She arrived at her home disguised as a young student. It's thought that her victim believed that she was a child due to her looking quite young and also her arriving in a school uniform. After being let in, she stabbed the young woman to death before leaving for the supermarket. There she bought cleaning supplies and bin bags and headed back. After returning to the house, she dismembered the young woman. She then got into a taxi carrying the woman's body parts and put them in a wooded area. The taxi driver sensed that there was something odd going on and reported this to police, who later found the body parts. They arrested Jung and she has since been convicted of murder. Investigators also found her internet search history included how to kill and ways to get rid of a body 4 months prior to the incident. The police stated that Jung had concocted the plan to catch the victim unawares and kill her out of curiosity. She had apparently had an unhealthy obsession with true crime books and shows. She has since been sentenced to life in prison.
These are videos humans were never meant to see. Okay, so we all know how North Korea lies and makes stuff up to their citizens literally 100% of the time. And anything they say to them, the citizens will believe it and have to believe it. Well, the video I'm about to show you shows a North Korean tour guide giving a tour, explaining how North Korea beat the United States of America in a war. This is absolutely crazy, and just listen to this.
Korea, they even brought aircraft carrier Enterprise. They make us surrender by force of arms. At the time, they said they would start another Korean war if we didn't return the ship and the previous sailors. But following the instruction of the great leader Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il, we responded that we would answer their retaliation with retaliation and answer their all-out war with an all-out war. We didn't surrender, but we took tough stance. So in the long run, they had no choice but to propose dialogue. So 11 months after the capture, the U.S. government sent letter of apology. That was December 1968. And that apology was the first one that they ever sent to the other government in the history of America. So following that, all sailors were sent back to the country. 82 exactly. One was sent back dead, and the rest of them were sent back alive. But we didn't send the ship because that is a war trophy. Okay? Let's continue here.
You should just say that.
This teenager made friends with a lonely stranger and he then killed her in the most horrific way. Karen Dewa was a 16-year-old girl from Fife. She was a talented dancer who was described as a likeable and kind girl. She was a family girl who spent a lot of time with her elderly nan. It was 2005 and 18-year-old Colin Evans from Wales had just moved over across the road. As I said, Karen was a really kind girl and she wanted to make him feel welcome in the area. She befriended Colin, not having a clue what he was capable of. Now, Colin was no stranger to the police and he was accused of at least 14 disturbing offences. This had been going on since he was 10 years old. One woman even reported him to police 40 separate times over stalking and harassing her young son. On one occasion, he tried to lure a young boy out of school by forging a note. Colin ended up becoming homeless and being placed in a homeless shelter in Fife. He continued stalking and harassing young children in the area. Frustratingly, he seemed to slip through the net and police just didn't want to know. Then on the 20th of January 2005, after Karen and Colin had struck up a friendship, things turned incredibly dark. The pair had had an argument and Karen reported Colin to police, not knowing her life was about to be in danger. Colin launched a vicious attack on the 16-year-old. He beat her, strangled her, and pulled her hair out. He dragged her down the stairs and then tried to dismember her body. He then stuffed her into a bin and set it on fire. His temporary accommodation was apparently covered in blood and hair. Unaware of the horrors that had taken place that evening, Karen's parents reported her missing. Tragically, the following morning, her charred remains were found. Police apprehended and charged Colin with her murder. He smirked through his court case and was given life with a minimum of 17 years.
These are scary things you should never ask Alexa. So we all know how you can ask Alexa or Siri the strangest questions and get the strangest answers. Well, this is exactly what this girl did when asking her Alexa what the Antichrist is. And this is what Alexa said. It's extremely disturbing, and wait till the end.
The Antichrist. The noun, Antichrist, can have a few meanings. 1. A particular personage or power, variously identified or explained, who is conceived of as appearing in the world as the principal antagonist of Christ. 2. An opponent of Christ, a person or power antagonistic to Christ. 3. A disbeliever in Christ. 4. A false Christ. Alexa, is the Antichrist real? This might answer your question. According to Wikipedia, in Christian eschatology, the Antichrist, or Antichrist, is a person prophesied by the Bible to oppose Christ and substitute himself in Christ's place before the second coming. The term is found 5 times in the New Testament, solely in the first and second epistle of John. The Antichrist is announced as the one who denies the Father and the Son. Alexa, who is the Antichrist? I'd rather not answer that. Alexa, who is the Antichrist? I'd rather not answer that. Alexa, tell me, who is the Antichrist? Sorry, I'm having trouble. Please try it in a little while. Alexa, where is the Antichrist? Wagner Lamounière has lived in Brazil and was born in Belo Horizonte, Minas Gerais, Brazil. Okay.
In November 2021, this woman rang her mother and told her that she'd saved her 2 children. She then dialed 911 and told the dispatcher that she wanted to report a murder. It was in fact 2 murders. Tragically, Liana had slit the throats of her 2 children and then took them into their beds. The children's father, Travis, had previously voiced concerns about Liana's mental health, and she'd actually told hospital staff during a mental health episode that she was hurting her children. She later claimed that this was a false report. The children were briefly placed into Travis's care, but after Liana showed that she was receiving weekly treatment and had spent 3 weeks in a treatment centre, they were returned back to her. Travis was only allowed every Wednesday and every other weekend visits. Following the 911 call, emergency services found the 3-year-old and 5-year-old children in their beds, tucked in. They had lacerations to their throats and defensive wounds on their hands. A steak knife was found under one of the beds. Liana pleaded guilty to the murders, saying, quote, "I had to save my children before someone else killed them. It was the only way that we all wouldn't burn. Now I'm the only one of us that will." The children's father, Travis, read out a victim impact statement and said, quote, "Every second of the day, all I can picture is Liana brutally murdering my kids. I pleaded over and over that my children were in danger." Before her sentencing this week, Liana addressed the court and said, quote, "I did not want to hurt my kids for any other reason than I did not want them to get hurt by anyone else. I felt like I had to protect them forever because I felt like we were not safe. I was supposed to die with them. They visit me in my dreams, and that's how I know they're okay." Leanna was sentenced this week and she received life in prison. So following on from my last video, which is tagged below, I wanted to cover the crimes of Bobby Joe Long in a little bit more detail. Bobby was born in October 1953 in West Virginia. He married his high school sweetheart Cindy in the 70s, but he was extremely abusive towards her. They had 2 children together, but eventually divorced in 1980 after a particularly bad beating in which Bobby smashed Cindy's head into the TV screen, knocking her unconscious. She received a laceration to the top of her head and she had to drive herself to the hospital, but before she left, Bobby told her that if she told anybody what had happened, he'd kill her. Divorced and alone, Bobby started to contact women through classified ads, and this is where his murder spree began. He moved to Tampa Bay in 1983 and his first victim was 20-year-old Ann Wick, who he raped and strangled while she was hitchhiking. Over the next 8 months, Bobby abducted, raped, tortured and murdered 7 other women over 3 counties. The bodies were usually found in a state of decomposition long after the murders, after being dumped in wooded areas. They were usually vulnerable young women walking alone. Bobby would persuade them to get into his vehicle, where he'd then torture and murder them. Bobby's next victim was 17-year-old Lisa McVeigh, who featured in my last video. She was held captive by Bobby for 26 hours before eventually being released. Bobby then went on to murder another 2 women before eventually being caught. Lisa actually helped in the investigation, and Bobby was arrested in November 1984. Bobby Joe Long received 8 life sentences and 2 death sentences for his crimes. He was eventually executed by lethal injection on the 23rd of May 2019, with his 2 surviving victims present.
What? Nothing there, mate. Nothing there. What? There's nothing there.
This is the head crack video, one of the most cold and disturbing videos you will ever watch explained. On October 17th, 2022, Israel Trejo traveled to Riverhead, New York to buy an axe off a person who lived in an apartment building. But this is where 22-year-old James Patterson was hanging out. Nobody knows how this footage got leaked, but the CCTV camera is in the corner of the room picking up everything. The clip is short and it's only 14 seconds long, but the video is extremely traumatic. As you play the video, you see 4 people in the open space apartment. You see a female in the kitchen and another man in the same room as James and Israel. James can be seen sitting on the sofa and it looks like he's eating while looking at his phone. You also see a little dog wandering around the room. Israel Trejo is standing up with the axe resting against his shoulder. He is intently looking at James, but nobody notices it or points out that it's strange. Israel then stares at James for about 7 seconds as he holds the axe over his shoulder. He looks over his shoulder quickly before bringing the axe down directly on James's skull, and this makes an extremely loud cracking noise similar to the sound of splitting wood. Israel and the other man in the room then run out of the apartment. The axe is still stuck in James's skull as his body stiffens up and contorts. The woman in the kitchen realizes something is wrong as she heard the loud cracking noise. She then leaves the kitchen and sees James with the axe in his skull. She lets out a few curses before letting out the loudest scream you will ever hear in your life. It's so loud it literally causes the audio to pop. The best way to describe it is a blood-curdling scream. James was then taken to the hospital with the axe still in his head, according to a police report. He had surgery but succumbed to his injuries and died 3 days after the attack. Israel was arrested shortly after this for suspicion of murder, and in August 2023 he was sentenced to life in prison. There was absolutely no motive for this attack, and it was just senseless murder. This case is absolutely sickening and awful, and may James Patterson rest in peace.
This is the most haunted theme park in America, Lake Shawnee in West Virginia. This place is haunted by thousands of ghosts. So Lake Shawnee is a massive abandoned amusement park with a very dark and very disturbing past. Long before the amusement park was ever constructed, a tragedy already occurred on the land. You see, in 1775, a settler named Mitchell Clay made his claim right there on that property. Only a few years later, though, 2 of his children were murdered by indigenous peoples, But a third child of Mitchell's named Ezekiel was captured, he was brought to Ohio, and he was burned at the stake. I mean, look at it. It even says right there on the historical plaque. You can't make this up. All three of those kids' bodies are buried over here in the park property. Now, when Lake Shawnee was first established, people just kept dying. There were so many accidents in the park that it began to gather a haunted or cursed reputation. For example, a child was killed right here on this old abandoned swing set while the swing was in operation. Obviously, there was a drowning or two in this lake, and over here in this lake, I heard a story from the owner when I visited that a child was pulled under the water, supposedly by some sort of phantom force. After the child went under the water, the parents searched, they couldn't find their child, but eventually, a while later, they felt something brush against their leg under the water, and it was their child's body. But why could this place be so cursed, you ask? Well, right next to the property is a mass grave for indigenous peoples where over 3,000 bodies are suspected to be buried. I'm talking about the parks right here, and just over here is where this huge burial plot is. And people think that obviously if they were all buried right there, some of those bodies may have moved in this direction. Over the years, people have experienced all sorts of paranormal activity here, the most terrifying kind of all. People have seen children sliding down the slides, riding the rides. People have seen figures riding the old Ferris wheel, waving at them, shadow figures that disappear. People have heard the sounds of giggling, heard children's voices, adult voices, and people have even seen eerie creatures and other shadow forms in these woods that surround the park. There's even more history that I'm missing out on here, but if you want to watch the full documentary that I shot there where we stayed overnight, just head to my YouTube channel. It was one of the craziest nights of my life. We had the entire amusement park to ourselves, and we caught some crazy paranormal activity on camera while we were there. Let me know below, would you spend the night here alone?
This killer accidentally admitted to his crimes by accident when he forgot he was wearing a microphone while taking part in a documentary. This is how a true crime documentary exposed a killer. In 1971, Robert Durst met Kathleen McCormack and they got married. At the time of her disappearance in 1982, Kathleen had nearly graduated college. She was last seen by a witness at a dinner party where she appeared to be upset. She got a call from Robert and left. Robert admitted to having argued with Kathleen that night, but he said he put her on a train to New York and then never saw her again. Her friend called police to report her missing. Interestingly, Kathleen had been treated at a medical centre for facial bruises weeks prior to this and told the friend that Robert had done it. Robert had actually been dating someone else for some time prior to this and had been living separately to Kathleen. When her family broke into her cottage to try and find out where she was, they found the place had been trashed and her possessions put in the bin. Kathleen's family always believed that Robert was involved in her disappearance. In 2000, Susan Berman, a friend of Robert's, was found murdered. Now, she'd actually provided Robert with an alibi for Kathleen's disappearance. Now, pay really close attention to this next bit. Days after she was killed, a letter addressed to the Beverly Hills Police Department contained Susan's address and the word cadaver on it. On the envelope, Beverly was misspelled. Robert admitted in 2005 that Susan had called him shortly before her death to say that the police wanted to question her about Kathleen going missing. It's believed that Robert killed Susan to keep her quiet. In 2001, Robert's neighbour's body parts were found floating in Galveston Bay. Robert's elderly neighbour, Morris Black, had been killed and Robert was arrested. He was actually released on bail and fled and was found about a month later in Pennsylvania. He was found with $37,000 cash, 2 weapons, and interestingly, Morris Black's driving license. In court, Robert claimed he was acting in self-defense. He said he'd accidentally shot Morris and dismembered his body. Due to lack of forensics, he only got 5 years in jail. This is where things get really crazy. HBO was filming a documentary called The Jinx. During production, Susan's stepson found a letter written by Robert. This contained the same spelling error in the word Beverly as the anonymous letter to police. This implicated Robert in the murder. Now, while filming the documentary, Robert needed the toilet. He forgot that he had a microphone still attached to him. He was recorded talking to himself. He said, "There it is, you're caught. You're right, of course, but you can't imagine. Arrest him." And then he said, "What a disaster. He was right. I was wrong." And finally he said, "I'm having difficulty with the question. What the hell did I do? Killed them all, of course." Imagine getting married only to be decapitated by your husband 3 months later. 21-year-old couple Jared and Angie got married in October 2022. Around 4 p.m. on the 11th of January, police were called to their home in Texas. Police made a grim discovery in the pair's bathroom after finding, quote, what appeared to be the head of the victim to be in the shower, end quote. Angie's body was discovered on the floor near the bed in a pool of blood with multiple stab wounds to her back. It was actually Jared's poor parents that initially made this discovery after entering the home. They then obviously alerted police to what they found. Jared was arrested and has confessed to killing his wife with a kitchen knife. Jared was actually captured on CCTV, casually stealing a bottle of beer from Angie's workplace just minutes after it's believed that he killed her. Angie's friends have reported to police that the couple's relationship was toxic and Jared was very controlling. Jared's bond is currently set at $500,000. This schoolboy stabbed his teacher to death in front of a classroom full of students. 61-year-old Anne Maguire was a Spanish teacher teaching in Leeds. She'd actually worked at the school for 40 years and she was only 5 months off retirement. However, in April 2014, something absolutely horrific happened. One of her students was 15-year-old Will Cornick. He'd always been described as a smart student who never really caused any trouble. Classmates regarded him as a polite student, but after he got diagnosed with diabetes, his personality seemed to change. In 2013, he tried to join the army, but because of his diagnosis, he was rejected. Being in the army had been his dream, so this was really upsetting for him. After failing to complete his Spanish homework, he was given detention by Anne. He also expressed a wish to her that he wanted to drop Spanish, but she wouldn't let him, which only angered him more. He began to develop a deep-rooted grudge against Anne. Shockingly, he reportedly messaged his friends on Facebook asking if one of them would kill her for him for £10. During one school day, halfway through his Spanish class, Will decided to get up and attack Anne with a knife. The classmates watched on in horror as he chased her out of the classroom. When there, another teacher heard her screams and tried to shield Anne from any more blows from him. Will then allegedly returned to his class and told his classmates how it was a shame that he hadn't killed her. However, Anne did actually pass away from her injuries. Will later admitted that he did plan also to kill 2 other teachers. One of them was actually pregnant at the time. He's been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 20 years. This is one of the most horrific cases I've heard recently, so please be warned before watching. 29-year-old Taylor Parker has just been sentenced to death for a crime so horrendous that I can't believe a human is capable of this. Regan Simmons Hancock and Taylor had met online. Their online friendship soon blossomed into a real-life connection. It was 2022 and Regan was married with a young daughter. She was also 8 months pregnant at this time. Taylor was also pregnant, or so it would seem to the outside world. She was posting pregnancy pictures on social media and even hosted a gender reveal party. Little did her loved ones know that she was actually staging the entire thing. Regan and Taylor were really good friends around this time and they were bonding over their pregnancies. Regan even shared a Facebook status thanking Taylor for bringing her round a gift and Starbucks. This was the day before she would be murdered by Taylor. On Taylor's supposed due date, she made her way round to Regan's house in Texas. Shortly after, Regan's mum made a horrifying discovery. Her daughter was face down on the floor, deceased with blood everywhere. Her mum rang the emergency services and they raced to the scene. It became apparent that her baby had been, and again a massive trigger warning here, ripped out of her stomach, and Regan had been stabbed over 100 times. Meanwhile, Taylor was pulled over for speeding and driving erratically. She'd actually put the baby in her lap with the umbilical cord coming out of her trousers to make it seem like she'd just given birth. When the pair were taken to hospital, the horrors of what actually happened became apparent. The newborn baby tragically passed away and Taylor was arrested. She was sentenced to death, but her defense lawyer said that her loved ones should have done more to protect her earlier on when she was pretending to be pregnant.